This next feature that I'm going to show you is really helpful when you're trying to lay out content. Now, we really haven't talked about the box model. We haven't talked about layout. We don't really know much about margin and padding. And all of those things really make laying content out a little bit more complicated than what you would probably expect. Because of that, and because it's all implemented through CSS, there's a series of things that could potentially happen. You have styles overriding other styles. You have a style in the wrong location, and you're not getting the desired results. All of these things can ultimately produce a time-consuming problem that you're going to have to troubleshoot. Fortunately, Adobe has built in some tremendous tools that make this a lot easier. The first is something called CSS Inspect. Now, if you use other tools for web development, things like Firebug and the developer console within Google Chrome, some of these things that I'm about to show you may seem somewhat familiar, but they're a little bit more powerful inside of Dreamweaver. What I'd like you to do is come over to one of the documents that you've styled, tips or tips 2, it doesn't really matter, and come over and click Live. To switch this into live view, we now know that this content is being rendered by the WebKit rendering engine. We can then come over and click Inspect. Now, when you do that, you'll notice that the page highlights. Now, the page is trying to give you some information. You'll see light blue areas, which is essentially the content of the element. So at this point, we don't really have anything selected, so we're seeing the content of the body. Then we have a yellow highlight that will appear, which represents the margin property. So in this case, by default, even though we didn't assign it, there's margin values for the browser. All browsers have a default style sheet, and part of that default style sheet are these margins for the body. Then, if you continue to move about the page, you'll notice that those highlight areas change. If I go ahead and scroll down, you'll also notice that there's a purple area that can appear, and that purple area represents the padding property. So this can be really helpful. If you're trying to determine why there's more space in between this paragraph and this paragraph, we can instantly see it has everything to do with the padding associated with this div element. We can also see that this H2 has some margin associated with it, and that's the case really for all these heading elements. So CSS Inspect makes it a little bit easier to determine what exactly is going on within the document. And like I said, when you begin to create layouts inside of Dreamweaver, this will become incredibly helpful. There's another tool that you can use in conjunction with CSS Inspect that make it even more powerful, and that option is the Code Navigator. Now, the Code Navigator works outside of CSS Inspect, so in the next movie, we'll take a look at the Code Navigator, what it offers, and then I'll show you how you can use it with CSS Inspect.